Welcome back to the show. Today, we are unpacking something pretty major in UK energy policy, powering Britain's future inside the Advanced Nuclear Framework. This is all about how the government plans to bring in private sector, cutting-edge, smaller modular reactors that can be built faster and, in theory, cheaper. So, to make sense of this, I am joined by an experienced nuclear lawyer who has lived through multiple waves of energy policy. Let us start with the big picture. What is this Advanced Nuclear Framework actually trying to do?
At its core, it is the government's playbook for enabling privately led advanced nuclear projects in England and Wales. It focuses on three families of reactors: small modular reactors, advanced modular reactors, and micro modular reactors. Instead of the state commissioning big plants directly, the framework creates an enabling environment where private developers come forward with their own projects at their own commercial risk. The headline tool is the United Kingdom Advanced Nuclear Pipeline, which is a formal process to assess projects and, for the best ones, give a limited in-principle government endorsement that they are credible and potentially deliverable in the UK.
I want to dwell on that phrase, limited in-principle endorsement. It sounds very non-committal and very lawyerly. For a developer or an investor, what does that actually buy you?
It buys you a public signal from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and Great British Energy, Nuclear, that they have done structured due diligence and think your project could feasibly be delivered here. You get a formal statement of limited, in-principle endorsement. You are listed on the public advanced nuclear pipeline, and you gain access to discussions with government on potential revenue support and possible protections against high-impact, low-probability risks. It is not investment advice, it is not a guarantee of success, and it does not bind regulators. But it is a serious credibility marker in a market where people are trying to distinguish substance from slide decks.
Let us rewind to why the UK is doing this now. The document is very clear about ambition: zero carbon electricity by 2030, net zero by 2050, and this clean energy superpower mission. How does advanced nuclear fit into that narrative?
Nuclear fills a very particular gap. Renewables like wind and solar are variable. As we add more of them to the system, you need reliable, firm, low-carbon power to stabilize the grid. Nuclear can run continuously, provide baseload, and increasingly flexible output. Advanced technologies add more use cases. Small modular reactors can plug into the grid or provide heat to industry. Advanced modular reactors can operate at higher temperatures for things like hydrogen production or synthetic fuels. Micro-modular reactors can supply remote sites or critical infrastructure that do not have good access to the grid. The framework is about taking that potential and turning it into deployable projects that help decarbonize everything from data centers to steel plants.
On that, the document has this striking passage about Microsoft, Amazon, and Google already signing power purchase agreements with advanced nuclear vendors in the United States for future data centers. It then links that to the UK's own artificial intelligence growth zones. Is it fair to say one explicit driver here is we need clean, firm power for artificial intelligence, or those data centers will simply go elsewhere?
Yes, that is exactly the implication. The text talks about artificial intelligence growth zones and large artificial intelligence clusters, driving substantial new demand for clean, firm power. If you are trying to host big artificial intelligence workloads domestically, you need reliable, low-carbon generation next to, or closely connected to, those facilities. Advanced nuclear is being positioned as a prime candidate. That is why you see specific UK-focused announcements referenced. For example, X-Energy and Centrica planning a UK fleet of advanced modular reactors, targeting up to 6 gigawatts of capacity, beginning with a proposed 12-reactor deployment at Hartlepool of around 1 gigawatt, and Holtec, EDF and Tritax, planning to convert the former Cottam coal site in Nottinghamshire into an advanced data centre hub, powered by small modular reactors, valued around £11 billion. It is about industrial strategy, not just decarbonisation.
Let us get into the pipeline itself. If I am a developer with a design and a business plan, what happens when I knock on the government's door?
You go through 3 stages. First, an eligibility check. They confirm you are within scope, land-based, non-mobile fission, using a small, advanced or micro-modular reactor design. Uranium-235 enrichment below 20%, a mainland site in England or Wales, and a credible aim to start construction within 10 years of joining. They also look at basic national security, sanctions and solvency controls. Second, A project readiness assessment. That is the core piece. It starts with a rapid triage, then a deeper dive, conducted jointly by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero and Great British Energy, nuclear. They examine 5 areas: your technology and supply chain plan, your developer capability, your finance, funding and investment plan, your siting strategy, and your operator and end-user arrangements. Third, if you meet or exceed the threshold set in the guidance and ministers agree, you get invited onto the pipeline, subject to terms of participation.
Let us unpack those 5 areas a little in plain language. Technology and supply chain. That is, can you actually build this thing and can anyone supply the parts?
Exactly. They want to know if your technology is realistic and whether you have a credible pathway to manufacture it at scale, including plans to utilize UK capabilities like the high-value manufacturing catapult or domestic fuel cycle capacity. Developer plan is: who are you? What have you done before? And can you manage a complex nuclear project? Finance, funding, and investment is: where is the money coming from? How do you intend to structure the deal? And is your risk allocation plausible? Siting is both technical and commercial. Can this design work on this piece of land? And do you actually have a route to secure that land? An operator and end user is about who will run the plant and who will buy the output, whether that is the grid, an industrial off-taker, a data center, or a hybrid.
There is a neat bit in the document about breaking what you might call the site access catch-22. Landowners are nervous about giving site options to developers who cannot prove credibility, and developers cannot prove credibility without site access. The pipeline is being sold as a solution to that deadlock. Do you buy that?
It does not solve it by force. The framework is very clear. It is not a mechanism for the government to intervene in property deals. But it does give both sides an objective reference point. If you are a landowner with a former nuclear site, a project which has passed the project readiness assessment, and is on the pipeline has at least been vetted by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero and Great British Energy, nuclear. That might give you more comfort to sign an options agreement. Equally, a developer can point to their statement of limited, in-principle endorsement as evidence in negotiations. It is a soft lever, but a meaningful one.
Funding and finance are a big chunk of this. The document keeps emphasizing this is about private capital. Developers must bear most of the economic risk, but then it also offers a fairly serious menu of support. Can you walk through that menu?
There are 3 main pillars. First, revenue support, a mechanism such as a contract for difference, which stabilizes future revenues so developers can manage market risk and secure finance. The government is explicit that this would generally not cover the construction phase for these technologies. Support is focused on the period when the plant is delivering benefits to consumers. Second, protections against high-impact, low-probability risks. That is about uninsurable or prohibitively expensive risks, which, if left entirely on the developer, would make the project uninvestable. Here the government is considering 2 main tools: political and regulatory protection against sudden changes that could strand assets, and a last resort insurance backstop for residual risks. The principle is that ordinary commercial risk stays with the private sector. Third, the National Wealth Fund. That is a £27.8 billion public investor and policy bank with a dedicated nuclear team, able to offer debt, equity, and hybrid instruments. Its risk appetite is higher than a typical commercial investor, but it still needs to be profitable across its portfolio and deliver value for money. It has already helped take Sizewell C to financial close and will focus engagement on pipeline members.
I noticed an important caveat. Entering the pipeline does not guarantee any of this. Support is case by case and subject to affordability, value for money, and the developer carrying most of the economic costs. From a legal risk perspective, that feels like the government trying to be encouraging, but also very careful not to create legitimate expectations.
Exactly. The document is full of caveats making clear that the framework and the pipeline do not fetter ministerial or regulatory discretion, do not promise any particular outcome, and definitely do not constitute investment advice. It even goes as far as saying that, where the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero is both assessing a project for the pipeline and later making decisions on support or consents, it may separate officials and ministers into different roles to preserve the integrity of decision-making. They are trying to support the market while staying on very solid administrative law ground.
Let us talk about the enabling environment, planning, grid, regulation, because if those do not work, none of this investment machinery matters. Starting with planning, what does the new National Policy Statement EN7 actually change for advanced nuclear?
EN7 moves away from a narrow list of pre-designated large nuclear sites and towards a flexible, criteria-based approach. It explicitly brings small modular reactors and advanced modular reactors within the development consent framework and supports co-location with energy-intensive industries. For developers, that means you can make the case for new sites, not just traditional nuclear locations, provided you meet the criteria. It also insists on early community engagement and is supplemented by guidance on statutory consultees, indicative costs, and timelines.
And then there is grid connection. The document references the National Energy System Operator's Strategic Spatial Energy Plan, due in 2027, and the Gate 2 to Whole Queue reforms. Why are those relevant to nuclear, which we usually think of as quite slow and long-term?
Because the queue has been one of the biggest blockers to any new generation, including nuclear. The Gate 2 to Whole Queue process cuts the connections queue by roughly 2/3, prioritizing projects that are ready and needed for 2030. It identifies 132 gigawatts of projects with priority connections by 2030 and a further 151 gigawatts by 2035. For nuclear developers, if you can show you are genuinely advanced, and being on the pipeline will help make that case, you are more likely to get a workable grid connection date. And the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan gives you a forward look at optimal locations and capacities, which should influence site selection and design from the outset.
Regulation is always the elephant in the room. The framework leans heavily on the idea that the UK has world-class goal-setting regulation, the ALARP principle, best available techniques, and so on. But it also acknowledges that regulation can be a bottleneck. What is being done on that front?
There are several layers. First, the existing system. The Office for Nuclear Regulation, the Environment Agency, and Natural Resources Wales apply a goal-setting regime. Operators must show that risks are reduced as low as reasonably practicable, and that best available techniques are used to minimize environmental impact. That encourages continuous improvement rather than compliance with a fixed checklist, and it is intended to be compatible with innovation. Second, early engagement. The nuclear regulators offer a voluntary early engagement process so that developers can talk through designs and approaches before entering formal generic design assessment or licensing. That is particularly valuable for advanced technologies with novel fuels or coolants. Third, the Nuclear Regulatory Task Force. This was an independent group, chaired by John Fingleton, asked by the Prime Minister to consider radical reforms to improve delivery without compromising safety. In November 2025, it produced 47 recommendations. The government has accepted the principle of all of them, promised a full implementation plan within 3 months, and aims to complete implementation within 2 years, subject to legislation. One immediate outcome was a strategic steer from the Prime Minister to the entire nuclear sector. Push the boundaries of what is lawfully possible through proportionate regulation and stronger collaboration to accelerate safe and efficient delivery.
There is also the international angle. The document talks about aligning with International Atomic Energy Agency standards and collaborating with the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, including a Memorandum of Cooperation and a 2025 Atlantic Partnership for Advanced Nuclear Energy. For a developer, what is the practical upside of that?
It means you can design your technology and your licensing strategy with multiple jurisdictions in mind. If you have a reference design going through assessment in the United States or Canada, you can leverage that work in the UK and potentially pursue joint or split assessments. The intent is to harmonise requirements where possible, reduce duplication, and make it easier for reactors licensed in one country to be exported or replicated in others. That is attractive to investors because it increases the addressable market and reduces regulatory uncertainty.
Let us pivot to fuels and non-proliferation, because this is where the framework gets very explicit. It says, all civil fission reactors in the UK will be fueled by uranium enriched up to 20% uranium-235, period. As a lawyer, what do you hear when you read that sentence?
I hear the government drawing a very clear red line. That enrichment cap sits right at the boundary between what is called high-assay low-enriched uranium and high-enriched uranium. and it responds directly to recommendations from the Nuclear Regulatory Task Force about clarity for industry. For developers, it means, if your design relies on higher enrichment, you are out of scope. If you stay below 20%, you can benefit from the domestic high-assay, low-enriched uranium program. Up to £300 million invested to create a UK supply chain, reducing dependence on Russian sources, and positioning the UK as a potential high-assay, low-enriched uranium supplier internationally. It also makes life simpler for export control and non-proliferation compliance, because the entire civil program is kept within a defined enrichment envelope.
The framework is quite blunt that some things are just not in scope right now. Offshore or floating nuclear platforms, civil nuclear propulsion, space-based reactors, transportable nuclear solutions. Why carve those out?
Because those raise distinct regulatory, legal, safety, and strategic questions that are not yet settled. Think of a floating plant in international waters, or a transportable micro-modular reactor moving across borders. Jurisdiction, security, liability, and environmental oversight become much more complex. The government is signaling that, for now, it will focus on land-based civil plants. It also leaves the door open to revisit those novel applications later, potentially with a separate policy framework if the market justifies it.
Speaking of liability, the nuclear third-party liability regime is the other big legal piece. The UK is already party to the Paris and Brussels conventions, and as of January 2026, it has acceded to the Convention on Supplementary Compensation for Nuclear Damage. What changes in practice because of that?
Accession to the Convention on Supplementary Compensation creates an additional international compensation pool in the event of a nuclear incident. Victims get access to higher potential compensation through the International Fund. Claims are channeled to the operator under strict liability and are heard in the state where the incident occurs. That clarity supports both victims and investors. For developers and their financiers, it signals that the UK liability regime is robust, internationally aligned, and designed to protect the supply chain by channeling claims to the operator, which can ensure against that risk. The government will also launch a call for evidence on how to align these arrangements, specifically with advanced nuclear technologies, such as small modular reactors and advanced modular reactors. Another key benefit of accession is enhanced alignment on nuclear liability, with treaty relations now established with Canada and the United States, making it potentially easier for international advanced nuclear developers to move forward in tandem on both sides of the Atlantic.
Waste and decommissioning are always the contentious topics. The document is pretty firm. If you are bringing in novel fuels or coolants, you have to fund research and development to prove the waste can be safely managed and disposed of, likely in a geological disposal facility. Does that shift more burden onto private developers than they might expect?
It makes the burden explicit. The government's stance is, you cannot just deliver an innovative reactor and leave the long-term waste problem to the state. You must show and fund how your specific waste streams and spent fuel can be stored, conditioned, and ultimately disposed of, including any necessary pre-disposal infrastructure and interim storage. Developers are encouraged to engage with regulators early and with nuclear waste services. The framework also signals that the UK may participate in international co-funded waste research if appropriate, and separately, for the existing civil separated plutonium stockpile at Sellafield, the policy is now to immobilize it, about 140 tons, into a safer, stable form suitable for geological disposal. That is a long-term program expected to support thousands of jobs in Cumbria and in the supply chain.
Before we wrap, I want to touch on the people and the industrial base behind all this. The framework paints a picture of a country gearing up not just in technology, but in skills and manufacturing. What are the key moves there?
On skills, you have the industry-led Nuclear Skills Plan delivering nearly 4,000 early career starters in 2024 and 2025, the Destination Nuclear Recruitment Campaign, regional skills hubs, and targeted growth in doctoral-level expertise, including up to 7 new centres for doctoral training, supporting between 470 and 675 PhD students from 2026-2027. Nuclear skills are singled out as a priority in the Clean Energy Jobs Plan. On manufacturing and supply chain, there is the high-value manufacturing catapult, with 6 specialist centres, focused on nuclear-qualified manufacturing, advanced welding, additive manufacturing, digital engineering, inspection, modularization, and so on. It acts as both a technical enabler and a strategic advisor on regulations, standards, and export opportunities. And then there are the sites themselves: Great British Energy, nuclear owning Oldbury and Wilfer, with Wilfer as the first small modular reactor project, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority repurposing land at Chapel Cross, Trosvenid, and elsewhere for clean energy, and former sites like Harwell and Berkeley becoming innovation campuses. All of this is about using existing infrastructure and skilled workforces to accelerate new projects.
Let us bring this home with some clear takeaways for listeners. First, this framework is not about one big government-owned plant. It is about creating a structured route, the UK Advanced Nuclear Pipeline, for private developers of small, advanced and micro-modular reactors to prove their readiness and get a limited, in-principle government endorsement. Second, the government is prepared, in principle, to support those credible projects with stabilised revenues, protections against uninsurable high-impact, low-probability risks, and investment via the National Wealth Fund, but only where projects are mostly privately financed, provide value for money, and have robust delivery plans. Third, the enabling environment is being overhauled: flexible siting under the new EN7 policy, grid queue reforms and spatial planning through the National Energy System Operator, radical regulatory reform following the Nuclear Regulatory Task Force, and a clear fuel strategy anchored on uranium enrichment below 20% with a domestic high-assay low-enriched uranium supply chain. Fourth, the UK is coupling this with serious investment in skills, manufacturing and research, from the United Kingdom National Nuclear Laboratory and high-value manufacturing catapult to new training centres and repurposed nuclear sites, so that advanced nuclear can support jobs, exports and regional growth as well as clean power. And finally, this is all framed within tight guardrails on safety, security, waste, non-proliferation, export control and liability, with a strong emphasis on early engagement with regulators and transparent, proportionate regulation. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the Advanced Nuclear Framework, and thank you for joining me to decode the legal and policy architecture behind it.
It has been a pleasure. This framework is dense, but it is a genuine attempt to make private advanced nuclear investable in the UK while keeping safety, non-proliferation, and public trust at the centre. It will live or die on execution: how the pipeline is run, how quickly planning and regulatory reforms land, and how industry steps up on skills, supply chain, and responsible waste management. For developers, investors, and communities, it is an invitation. If you can bring credible, land-based, small, advanced, or micro-modular reactor projects with enrichment below 20%, robust financing, and serious engagement on regulation, sites, and waste, the UK government is signalling that it is open for business. Thanks again to everyone listening. See you in the next one.